Welcome to And It's Live, the podcast which dives deep into football's most iconic seasons, stories, and what ifs. If you love football, history, tactics, and nostalgia, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell, and drop us a like on YouTube so you don't miss an episode. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of The Main Event, the history of the Champions League. We are halfway through our four-part series on 2010-11, which means the knockout has started, both the last 16 and the quarter-finals. Plenty of action, plenty of goals, and plenty of things to talk about this week. Good evening, David Edgar. How are we doing?
I am good, thank you, Martin. Yes, very much looking forward to this. A lot of action for us to get into this episode.
And Adam Thornton is here, of course. Adam, how are we doing?
Good, thank you. Yeah, I agree with David. There's a lot of action, a lot of goals, a lot of big games. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Can we start then in the San Siro, Milan drawn against Spurs? And Adam, I want to go back to something we talked about either last week, week before, can't remember. Jonathan Wilson's book, this seminal work on tactics, of course, inverting the pyramid, probably 2 or 3 years before here. Hugely popular, hugely important, and well received in English football, British football, that was starting to realise, maybe others had realised this a long time before, but certainly in the mainstream, that there's a real tactical hole, tactical understanding missing in our game. We're quite blunt, we're quite basic, and this is holding things back as a nation, national teams, etc., etc. English coaches are not as advanced as they are elsewhere in the world. And I guess one of the punch bags to that, one of the fall guys for that, is Harry Redknapp, this wheeler dealer, doesn't really speak much about details. You'll get a list on the wall about who's picking who up at a corner or a free kick, and that's basically it. It's all vibes and that kind of cheeky cockney chappy type approach. And he kind of became this figure of fun for the more intellectual side, I think, of the English football media. And here we have Spurs, who eventually took their time to get going, but certainly did get going, won that group, won it very well. And now they're back in the San Siro to play Milan, and they win. And this was a something to digest, I guess, for those who were very much lamenting the death of the English football manager. It's short-lived, but it was quite the night. Again, Spurs on the break, very, very clever. That's where the goal comes from, right? Peter Crouch nicely sweeping the ball away, and kind of plenty of space on that break. The other issue, of course, was Gattuso and Joe Jordan and all that nonsense. But Spurs win 1-0 in Italy. They see it out at home. Herrera Gomez is good, and as you probably would need to be over the course of those games. But it was a slight bit of gristle in that general narrative, I think.
Yeah, the irony of me saying there's going to be lots of goals and drama and you picking the 1-0 first is not lost on me. But yeah,
more drama in a 0-0 than there is in a 6-2.
More jeopardy is your favourite, isn't it? I think this is an interesting time, I think, and for me this is when I first started getting into I guess thinking about football in a kind of analytical or tactical way, if you wanna say that. And it was the rise of football Twitter, if you like. I had a very short-lived blog around about this time, which was a pun which I was really proud of, and I will not name now because it's still there and has about 4 views ever, and it's not something I'll be sharing. But it was around about this time. You were starting to see that sort of crossover with journalists that you just read in the newspapers, talking on Twitter conversationally, even replying to you in certain circumstances, which was new. And I think some of those barriers being broken down, I guess it's only natural that you then start to have conversations and you start to think about things in a different way. So I think all of that information, I guess, with Twitter and the rise of Twitter at this point, I think 2010 was really the first big major summer tournament. I can remember Twitter being a sort of play-by-play, minute-by-minute type thing. And yeah, it's sort of breaking those things down, and then naturally, like I said, people start to think about it differently. Things change, ideas change. So yeah, I think that it was a really interesting time for this. What I would say about the Harry Redknapp thing is, I maybe actually haven't really thought about that before. I'm interested to get yours and David's thoughts on this, but I potentially don't put him in that bracket of Sam Allardyce, Davy Moyes, sort of Brexit ball, if you will. I always remember this team and the Portsmouth team as probably predominantly having really good players and really ball players at times, but also being quite exciting. I know this is a 1-0 aggregate that we're talking about here, but I equate that Spurs team that he had to being one of their most exciting that I can remember. So I sort of get it in terms of his personality and all that sort of stuff and being Jack the Lad, if you like. But the thought of him as a sort of old school British manager, which he obviously is fine. But in terms of the playing style, I don't necessarily think I would have had him as that type of defensive coach who relies on set pieces, etc. He always felt a little bit more. I'm not exactly going to say there was any fantastic tactics going on, but it felt a little bit more attack minded than you might think there. Obviously not in this one, like we said. So yeah, it's an interesting point that I hadn't really considered before. I'm not sure what your guys' thoughts are on that.
I'll come to David in a minute, but he was entertaining. That Spurs team was entertaining, but British teams had been entertaining before. They'd been of the mindset. Well, Kevin Keegan, Newcastle and England manager, very entertaining, very attack-minded, but incredibly naive. There were no dossiers for every England player going into Euro 2000 on their 3 group opponents. It didn't happen at Newcastle. That kind of intellectualization, that kind of detail was just not associated with British managers, regardless whether they were more long ball kind of defensive merchants or just this very open, just up and at them, lads, let's go. We'll score 5 if they score 4. And I think Redknapp was kind of painted as that, which is why this game is interesting, because Spurs are very canny, they're very clever over the 2 legs, and it just flew in the face, I think, of that general reputation, but certainly his reputation as the freewheeling, just, for God and Blighty kind of approach. David, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's an interesting chat, lads. I kind of agree with you, Martin, that in Britain and in British football, less so now, it has evolved rapidly over the last 50 years, as Adam mentioned, in particular. But before then, there was this, if you remember at school, it wasn't cool to be clever. And this sort of anti-intellectual feeling, I think, is predominant. Liverpool, in their glory days in Europe, were very tactically astute. But when you hear the players talk about it, they go out of their way to try and suggest
Totally
that, yeah, oh no, we basically just played 5-a-sides and we ate fish and chips and drank beer and met up before the game. And you watch them and you're like, no, you're way ahead tactically. They would go abroad and play much more contained football, keep the ball, not give any opportunities, get the side back to Anfield and finish the job there. So I don't really buy it. And it's interesting that the 2 people you mentioned here, Harry Redknapp and Peter Crouch, the goal scorer, I think very much lean into that jokey, Jack the Lad, banter merchants, that sort of thing. And Peter Crouch has formed a very good post-football career out of it, and he seems a very likeable guy and best of British to him. But it does, I think, take away slightly from his footballing ability. Here is a guy we are discussing who scored the winning goal against Milan in a Champions League last 16. He is not a scrub. But I think that it is in that sector, which does exist and will continue to exist, and through tabloid journalism, whatever, this sense that we still get in British football that is changing as a younger generation brought up in that era that Adam has mentioned, who are interested in tactics. I mean, the 3 of us, you may not know this, listeners, but the 3 of us are involved in the press in Scotland, and we go into press rooms, and there is still among the older journalists this oh, you're not talking about tactics and all that rubbish. And it's like, well, it's not actually rubbish. It's quite interesting. It's what makes but they sort of look down on that, and you'd get this clash of cultures. In Redknapp's case, I always felt he enjoyed that because it allowed him to build this persona as a facade, the Jack the Lad, the transfer wheeler dealer, all that stuff. But look at the squads that he built at Tottenham and at West Ham. They were very international, and at Portsmouth in particular, Adam mentioned there. I don't think a coach who was all vibes can do that. It's very difficult managing a group of elite professionals. It's very difficult to manage a group of elite professionals from various different nations. And I think the public thing of not taking yourself too seriously allows you that distance to work behind the scenes. But his teams were well coached. They were disciplined. And I think it is just that British thing of not wanting to be seen to get above your station, always in fear that somebody's going to rip the piss out of you. And in the end, actually, it had a negative effect because that sort of thing cost Redknapp his job because he loved the Jack with England. I mean, he loved the Jack the Lad persona, and the FA we had Venables. We don't want this again. And like Venables, I think it distracts from what was a very good football coach. This is an excellent two-legged performance from Spurs. Now, you're absolutely right to point out Aurelio Gomez is excellent over the two legs, but that's going to happen. This Tottenham squad is not as good as the Milan squad it's up against, I would say, on paper. But they got the away goal, 10 minutes to go. That is the perfect European away. And this Tottenham team were not experienced Champions League campaigners, which to me makes this actually more impressive. But they played it very sensibly. They didn't, and I think the second leg, Martin, is slightly more impressive. Not, jumping on something that we lean into, which all Martin loves and else, but not getting caught up in the whole, right, we've got them back here, lads, 4-4-2, up and at them, leaving great spaces at the back to get exploited. They kept it cagey, and they said to Milan, you're going to have to break us down and beat us, and we're not giving you up anything for free. I think it's a very, very mature, I suppose is the word I'm looking for, a very mature display from a side who didn't have a lot of European experience at this point.
Yeah. I take like Rafa van der Vaart for example. I think he has spoken in the past that Redknapp was not the most detailed, but he genuinely loved playing for him, and he genuinely loved the freedom that Redknapp would give. And I think a lot of the signings that Redknapp made absolutely responded well to that kind of on-pitch freedom, and they'd come from leagues where you are coached to within an inch of your life and stand here and don't move from this kind of blade of grass, that kind of thing. And they thrived on that, and just a very amiable kind of chap. David, some of the chat was about that. A lot of the chat, of course, was Joe Jordan versus Rino Gattuso. So predictable that's what the British media latch onto when you have, as you said, quite a considered, cool, cultured performance.
Oh, absolutely, because this is just soap opera, isn't it? You've got everyone's playing their stereotype as well in this. You've got your hot-headed Italian and your grizzled, tough old Scotsman, and it's a pretty unsavoury incident. I don't think anybody should be going about headbutting guys who are nearly pensioners, as Gattuso did here. But I loved the pious hand-wringing that was going on in the UK media about it. I say hand-wringing, it was one hand because the other hand was down somewhere else, loving that they were able to cover this in the detail that they did. And you're right, it kind of felt like the actual victory that Tottenham had was a bit of an afterthought. But you've got two famously tough football guys here, Gattuso and Joe Jordan. And again, interestingly, the sins of a youth. Years later, he was in contention for the role at Tottenham Hotspur, and such was the negative fan reaction from the Tottenham supporters that immediately ended after talks. This, I think, was a couple of years ago now from when we record. But this is manna from heaven for a certain element of the British press, because, as I say, it's everything you want in it. The little hothead Italian, the big tough Scotsman who stood up and squared up to him for Blighty, and but it was a storm in a teacup. I think it's fair to say. But as I say, years later, Gattuso's in talks for the Spurs job. As soon as it leaks, the Spurs fans go absolutely insane, and Spurs realise they can't go there. So yeah, interesting.
And it felt that, oh my goodness, Milan really are dead. And I think they were a quarter-final and a semi-final since then. But yeah, it was kind of further evidence that they were very much a spent force. Poor old Arsenal, Davey. Well, not poor old Arsenal. It's their fault that they didn't win the group from a good position. And they get through in second place and they meet Barcelona again. And they lose again. But it wasn't quite as foregone conclusion as maybe previous encounters have been in the knockouts for Arsenal. We're behind, but fight their way back. Van Persie and Arshavin give them that lead at home. There's a messy goal right before half-time, I think, in the Nou Camp. But all right, here we go. There's Barcelona's away goal still in play, of course. They'll go on and score a few in the second half. But Arsenal do grab one back as an OG, and you think, well, could it? Well, it looked on for a bit, but Barcelona did find a way as they were going to all the way to Wembley. But kind of crystallising where Arsenal are, even when they're good, they're not lucky.
No, they're not lucky, and you're absolutely right. They are in this game till about 20 minutes to go, and then they lose 2 goals in 2 minutes. The first one, Xavi gets it, and then a penalty that Messi puts away. I think it's a really commendable performance from Arsenal. Look, there were times in that first leg, Martin, they got a chasing, but they held in. It was only one. Barca, I think, left the field with some regrets because I think they could have pushed. They were dominant in spells in this match without really going for the jugular. They were quite happy. They got the goal. They were in control. And it didn't look like turning around, but Arsenal get one back, which they were always capable of with a squad. It was a very talented squad. And then the place is roaring, and momentum in football, absolutely huge, particularly in these heavyweight contests. And I think there is a special noise comes from a crowd in a European game, isn't there? Just it's different and exciting, and especially against a side like Barcelona. And they get the victory. You're right, though. I don't think many gave them a chance of pulling it off over there. And I think it was actually a decent performance from them in the Nou Camp. One of the things labelled at this Arsenal team was its mental fragility at times. And it would have been easy to go to pieces there, but they didn't. Again, they hung in. And when they get the goal back, you're thinking, this is on. This could happen. And they are right in it, but then 2 goals. And then, simply put, they just don't see the ball very much for the rest of the match because Barcelona could do that to you, that metronomic passing ability to keep you at arm's length. And as good a side as Arsenal are, they're not exactly full of ball winners. The other thing about this Arsenal team, this Barcelona team, which Adam will talk about, at the time felt revolutionary, Adam. I know we see it now, and we've seen it now with various sides throughout Europe, but it wasn't for me simply how good they were on the ball. It was how quickly they won it back. And for a side that you look at and they don't have what at the time we would have considered to be your traditional ball winner, that hard tackling midfield, that Roy Keane guy. They don't have that. All of them could tackle. They just didn't go off their feet. They would just go and win the ball back really quickly. And I think it was Guardiola spoken about his 3-second rule. If we don't have the ball, go and win it back within 3 seconds. And that was the thing about them. Once they were in a lead, they were so difficult to prize out of it. And I think it was only a little bit of finding it maybe a wee bit too easy at the Emirates and not going for it in a way that they could have put the tie totally to bed. They didn't make that mistake second time round. But yeah, for me, Arsenal come out of this with a great deal of credit. They weren't as good as Barcelona, but they made a bit as good a fist of it as they could.
Toughest match Barcelona had in this whole Champions League, Adam, no?
Yeah, I think so. I remember this one for all the Fabregas noise, wasn't it? It was one of those. They'd put an offer in the year before, hadn't they? And there was all the big thing about Spain winning the World Cup, and everybody on the stage was everybody in the picture was a Barcelona player except Fabregas, and will he come, will he not come? This was his last season, obviously, and probably looking back, I don't know if this was mentioned at the time, you guys will maybe remember better than me, but it did feel like one of those, you're not coming this year, but I'll see you next year if we win.
It did.
Something.
He had one of those families that kept saying to the press and back home, basically, "Oh yeah, he's coming." You know what I mean? And agent forced to deny stories kept coming out. But basically, I think all his family around Barcelona will say, "Oh, he's coming next year."
Same as Ronaldo.
But
yeah.
So I was going to say maybe it's similar for that one, but I think yeah, I completely agree with you. It's a really interesting tie, and it is when you look at what's coming up, it is probably their biggest challenge, because we'll come on to later games. Obviously, they've got the ridiculous 4 Clásicos in 18 days or whatever it is that do come up. But yeah, I think it's their biggest challenge, and I think that's testament. And always, again, at this point, you're still thinking about Arsene Wenger and Arsenal as, all right, okay, we're in this transition now. They're very much firmly in this, just happy to be fourth situation. But yeah, at this point, I think they give them a right good game. I'm not sure it's ever a scare, or it ever feels like it's hugely in the balance, despite obviously winning the first leg. But it's interesting to note, though, when you get to that, what is it? No, it's not half time, is it? It's 2 each at half time, I think, in the second leg, 2 each in aggregate, and then Arsenal go ahead, I'm sure. I think Busquets.
Yeah.
Busquets on goal. So at that point,
ahead.
Do you know, at that point, you're thinking, oh, maybe that would be a surprise. But then they get their 2 goals in a few minutes, 10, 15 minutes later, and it sort of puts them through. So yeah, I think it's their biggest scare, if you can call it that. And yeah, full credit to Arsenal, because I did like this version of it. I think I mentioned before I was a big fan of Andre Arshavin when he came in. Van Persie, Nasri, Walcott, Fabregas. There was players there that I think worked well together. They probably just missed a little bit of oomph. They probably missed a little bit defensively, I think, and certainly behind them in midfield. But yeah, I did enjoy that. So it would have been an interesting one, but Barcelona deservedly through.
The other 2 English teams, quite prosaic, to be honest. Chelsea go to Copenhagen. Nicholas Anelka scored 2 goals. They see it home. United drawing against Marseille, 0-0 in France, and then the little P, Hernandez, pops up with 2 Old Trafford. I think there's a Wes Brown OG later on, but of no importance. But I guess it kept it interesting for those closing minutes. But yeah, English clubs just doing, I guess, what English clubs were doing at that time, and just dealing with teams. Trying to remember, really, around this period, was there an absolute shocker in knockouts from an English sub? I mean, yeah, Barcelona come around, Bayern Munich, really for Arsenal, who can't seem to get past that absolute massive club. But they all seem to do their business in the knockout rounds. Always the odd nonsense in a group game or whatever that finishes them second or whatever. But it's really, really business as usual, unless I'm missing something. Arsenal was second in that group, Adam. Shakhtar Donetsk were the group winners. They were drawing against Roma. We spoke quite complimentary about them as well last time out. A 3-2 defeat in Rome. And then old Willian, Eduardo doing the biz in the return leg. Very comfortable 3-0 victory. And yeah, this seemed like a bit of a break from the norm.
It did, yeah. Just on your point there, I was trying to rack my brains while you were talking about any surprises. I can't think of anything until a couple of years down the line where there's no English teams in the 2012, 2013 quarterfinals. They're all out before that. That was massive at the time, wasn't it? Because
yeah, huge. Chelsea
going to win. You've had United. You've had teams in the finals as well. So that would be the only one. Yeah, Shakhtar is fun. I think we mentioned last week it felt like they played Arsenal every time, but they were just sort of starting to come into it. Douglas Costa, I think, was just sort of coming into it. I know his career didn't exactly go the way that he wanted, maybe for a couple of reasons. But he was sort of just starting to come into it here. I think this might have been his first or second season there, and it was a pretty good team. I think at this point, we always say this again, don't we? There's like, oh, there's no teams that just appear and have their day for a bit, and then they come and I think I remember saying way back when we were covering, I don't know, 96 or something, CSKA Moscow. I was like, oh, that's sort of the smaller teams from the Eastern Bloc or old Eastern Bloc sort of disappearing, and then one comes and surprises you. And I think this is certainly one. Dario Serna was a guy that was kicking about at this time here as well. That David, I think, mentioned last week or the week before, you always associate sort of Balkan or Eastern European players with going to Serie A. Dario Serna was one that I, in my mind, has played like 10, 15 years in Serie A and then just went to Shakhtar Donetsk randomly, but he actually hadn't. He played 1 year in Serie A when he was like 37 or something. So it's an interesting way how your mind plays tricks on you. But anyway, I'm very much digressing there, but you've got this Brazilian conclave, I guess, or this Brazilian mix here that I never quite understood where it came from, to be honest. I know with probably it's money, first of all. I guess they're going over there for the oil money, but I never ever found out, or I never took the time to research whether it was like a specific agent that was taking them over there, or it was to do with like lax rules around citizenship, because that was a big thing at that point, wasn't it? If we get the players over, you only need 2 or 3 years to be eligible in Portugal and Belgium, where it was 5 years for Britain. So I'm never quite sure, but they had Fernandinho, Jadson, Willian, Douglas Costa, we mentioned, even guys who'd go and have decent careers, like Bruno Renan, I think his name was. He was a midfielder that I thought was going to be quite decent. Never really came to pass. But yeah, they had that mix of players, which is quite strange over there when you think it is still predominantly Ukrainian at the time. So yeah, I'm not really sure what that was about, but I remember that being fascinated by that there was this bunch of Brazilians playing in what was essentially a gas or a mining town in Ukraine. It's a bit random.
Yeah, I think it was, financially good for them, but also Brazilian football, South American football in general, they have pipeline and they have pipeline clubs and they have pipeline leagues. It's to do partly with what you said there, Adam, in terms of naturalisation processes, in terms of tax as well. And also, if my boy signs for you and does well, 2 years later, we're looking to move him on, right? No problem. Holland had it for years, Martin, when we were kids.
Romario,
Ronaldo, etc. Various Brazilians would go there. Portugal has always had this, and obviously has language as well, a big advantage with Brazilian players. But this Donetsk team could play a bit. They did one of the things that, Martin, is one of your favourite things in football, which is a 15-minute spell in which they just batter the opposition and leave them in a crumpled heap on the floor. And that's what they do in the first leg. They're a goal down. Roma are sitting, fairly comfortable, fairly confident. 15 minutes later, they're 3-1 down. And they get a goal back in the second half, but they are punch drunk. And when they go over there, they get taken apart. And it was a proper, excellent performance by Shakhtar. Controlled, attacking, made several chances apart from what they scored. And it's one of, I know you love this, so I'll pass this to you. One of the best sights in football when a side just completely have a spell and the opposition are at the end of it left going, what happened there?
It's risk reward, because you're conceding that control to only do things in bursts, but it's kind of accepting we're quite good at doing this. We're quite good at being very fast and very aggressive. You can't do that for 90 minutes, otherwise you'll be absolutely ragged. We don't have the control, the absolute 90-minute control of a Guardiola team, for example. So it is kind of putting eggs in that basket, but it's wonderful. I mean, as a neutral,
when it comes off,
I do love it. It's
what I like about this team, I guess, is how simple it was. I mean, Mircea Lucescu is the manager. Was very, very experienced. Even at this time, I think he'd been the Romania national team coach in the early 80s. So had been about a bit. I remember him at Inter Milan when he had Baggio and a couple others, wasn't exactly great. We've discussed that in depth. But he had bounced about a little bit, and he sort of found a wee bit of a home here, and was here for, I want to say, best part of a decade. But what I liked about it was he sort of looked at it simplistically and thought, what's the best? I mean, you can imagine what's the best way to win a game as well. I would quite like, I say this myself as well, I'd quite like Eastern European centre halves or Eastern European defenders and defensive midfielders. And then if I was picking, why don't I just have 4 Brazilian attackers? That would be that'd be great. What a great balance, and that is pretty much what it is. Outside of what I mentioned, Turner, and there was another guy who might have been Slovakian, Hubschman or something like that. At the time, but basically, yeah, front 4 of Brazilians and then just sheer Mourinho at the back. It was like Wenger in the front and Mourinho at the back, in some random little town in Donetsk, which I thought was quite simplistic, but it worked for them.
It really did, and Roma never recovered the whole time. The second leg, Roma, they made noises in the press, but I think there's a slight imposter syndrome, Adam. I don't know how you feel about this, about Roma in the Champions League. I think there's a lot of scar tissue, possibly Martin leading back all the way to 84. Not winning in their own stadium, that penalty shootout famously. But I think there is a sense with Roma when they get into these latter stages of, do we really belong here? But they desperately want to. But they've taken some terrible beatings over the years.
I think it's a fascinating thing, Davey. You know that? I think that's a great point. If you're not a club with a glorious European reputation, or certainly a feeling of underachievement, and I can empathise, then it creates pressure. And we know, we've talked about Liverpool, haven't we? We are not the best Liverpool sides that we've seen overachieve, win it, because they're tapping into something that's nothing to do with that squad. What Liverpool did in the 70s and 80s, absolutely, obviously, zero to do with those players there, but they're tapping into something that this is what this club does. And I think it works both ways. I think it's an interesting dynamic. Anyway,
the fascinating part of that for me, sorry, just quickly, is I think I don't know whether I would say imposter syndrome, David, but I would say potentially ideas above your station. And in a game like this, or a tie like this, I wouldn't have any doubt Roma would be coming into this going, who is this? We're
going to win. Yeah, we should win.
So that they're on a hiding to nothing, basically, because if they win, well, we expected you to win. If you don't, and you get battled in the way they get battered in the second leg, then it's a disaster. When really, over this period of time, they probably weren't as good as Shakhtar in the Champions League. You just think of it as a Ukrainian team, but actually, as I think we've hopefully discussed over the however many hundreds of episodes, being a Champions League team is almost a different thing to being in your league.
Yeah, and 100%. And Roma don't have the experience Shakhtar do.
Yeah,
and you're absolutely correct about that. You have a side here very confident, have been here, know what they're doing at this stage because they're in it more often than Roma. Because obviously it's more difficult for Roma to qualify for the Champions League at this point. They face more competition to get into it than Shakhtar do domestically. But once they get there, I always have the feeling with Roma, and it's been reinforced throughout this, of a side who are sort of trying to convince themselves they belong there. That you don't get from, as Martin said, these sides who have this European pedigree, where there's something bigger, there's something deeper, almost within the walls of the club and in the support, that they can just go into Europe and they can produce on this level. And Roma, for me, as I say, it's not just that they don't have much success in the Champions League, it's the way they tend to go out of it. There are quite a few severe beatings in that, and to me that there's a fear, I suppose, is what I'm saying. And when things start to go wrong, there's almost a sense of, I knew that was going to happen. It's almost tied in with self-loathing of, we knew that, why did we get our hopes up, kind of thing. So it's an interesting thing, because you're right, you're on that. A Ukrainian team against an Italian team, the Italian team should win, really, based on budgets, etc. But Shakhtar knew what they were about, were very confident. And the other side of that coin is they're not playing with that pressure that Roma are playing with, of their clubs, that the history of that club, plus the expectation, not only from their support, but from the footballing public of Italy, that they will go on and do something in it. Shakhtar don't have that. And I don't want to use the phrase surprise package, because at this stage of the game, they shouldn't have been. They'd been regular Champions League contenders. But because, I think if we're honest, we all don't watch a lot of Ukrainian football. We certainly didn't 15 years ago. They did have this air of mystery about them. And you add into the fact that they had this really exotic, talented front bunch, but they were far, far too good for Roma over these 2 legs.
I know that the levels are different, but I mean, they won the UEFA Cup 2 years before. I mean, they're not a pub team, but yeah.
No, that's what I'm saying. That they have that, yeah.
Yeah. The level of the level of the defeat was a bit of a shock. Let's move on a wee bit then. Valencia, very experienced Champions League side. Schalke, not so much. 1-1 in Spain and 1-1 at half time in Gelsenkirchen, but it's Schalke again. Davey, we spoke a wee bit about them in the group stage who come through. Peruvian sensation Jefferson Farfán with a couple, but they keep on moving on.
Yeah, they do, and I remember at this time being a little bit surprised about this, and it maybe ties on nicely to what we just discussed, because Valencia, with that pedigree, and Schalke don't have much of a European pedigree, certainly in the Champions League era. They really don't. I just thought that they would get through this tie. 1-1, as you say, and I think that Valencia are one of these clubs that their home games are very important in a two-legged tie to them because of the backing that they get from their support. So to get out there with a 1-1 was pretty good, but I don't know. I still just thought they would get through, and that is more about my own, football prejudices of, well, Valencia will beat because they have this track record pedigree.
And who scored in Valencia? Their nemesis yet.
Of course, that's we mentioned this. If listeners, if you go back to our episode on the Valencia Real Madrid final, I remain convinced, Martin, that Valencia would have beaten any other team in Europe that night apart from the one that they were up against. But he gets the goal, and it's a big goal. It's area of away games. It's beautifully poised at the start of the second half, but there is a fervent support in the Gelsenkirchen. It's there's 90,000 people in there. And the noise is incredible, and they just get on it. And in the end, actually, it's a really close game for three halves, and then Schalke produced the best football of either side over the course of the matches, and he's there. Jefferson Farfán, yeah, he kind of goes into my category of players who I thought might go on and do a bit more in the career than they did. Very solid career, and I'm sure he's not sitting in the first of the month waiting for his paycheck to drop. But I just thought he had a wee bit more talent than maybe he ended up, or maybe than what it turned into. A couple of wrong career moves, and you lose 2-3 years at your career at your peak era, because at this point he looked really exciting.
Okay, when Real Madrid have had trouble against Lyon in the knockouts of late, but not so much this year. Things are different now, of course. 1-1 in France, 3-0 in Madrid, and Mourinho and co march on. But Adam, we have a replay of last year's final, Inter and Bayern. Bayern, Mario Gomez sneaking a win in the San Siro, 1-0, and then a quite remarkable game in Munich. Bayern 2-1 up at one point, 3-1 up in the tie, of course, very much sitting pretty. But, for all the troubles they've had managerially since Mourinho left this season, they're still the champions of Europe, still very good players. And Wesley Sneijder is a classy player. And big Goran Pandev with the winner as well. But yeah, a big fun match to round off the last 16.
Yeah, absolutely. If every match involving Inter and Bayern was 3 each, I'd be happy, and I'd watch them all the time. Leonardo, the manager now, I think we mentioned that last week. Yeah. That bizarre year that he had, and I think he give them a little bit more. I think the Benitez. I think that's pretty obvious to say. They were still a little bit similar, obviously, as you would be with all the players and ingrained the couple of years under Mourinho and then Benitez. It was one of those. Don't want to say smash and grabs. That's unfair, but it was counter-attacking against a team who's wanting to keep the ball, basically. And as we see so often in these games, you can get hit on the break 100% if you're not expecting it. So the fact that they went through, it goes right down to the wire. You have to say, 80 last minute winner, I think it is, or last minute equaliser. Last minute equaliser to
that away goal,
to win on away goals. So yeah, they're looking good. I remember thinking it was just that strange. Didn't really know how to take it. The Benitez experiment did not work at all, and they've sort of moved on. But it always felt like a bit of a stopgap, which obviously it will be. But yeah, I guess they are the interesting aspect of it, which again maybe flies in the face of Mourinho and Benitez, was conceding that number of goals, and then very much in the next round, the number of goals that they concede as well would have been a bit of a shock. So that's maybe a contrast to what they've been used to.
Yeah, this match, Martin, prompted a hell of a lot of soul searching in Germany because, well, in Munich and the kind of pro-Munich press at least, they're 3-1 up at home. They should not lose this tie. And if you are Bayern, you are not allowed to lose a tie, even against the reigning European champions who it got by you pretty easily, you have to say, in the year's previous final. Goal up from the first leg, looking good now, and I'll get the away goal back quickly, but they turn it around. 2 quick goals, half time. They're 3-1 up on the night, and basically don't lose 2 goals in the second half. They lose 2 goals in the second half. The reaction to this was visceral because Bayern should not go out at the last 16. That's just not acceptable in Germany. It's not acceptable in Munich to do that, and it doesn't matter who you're up against. You shouldn't be there. It's a stinker of a tie for both of them, isn't it, at this stage? But such is the luck of the draw. But yeah, there was a lot of angry. If you get a chance, I remember vividly watching the scenes at the end. The Bayern fans let them know they were not happy people, and you know how calm that people at Bayern are. They're directors and whatnot. They obviously always take a defeat in good spirit.
Well, they would make amends, I think it's probably fair to say, over the next couple of years. Okay, let's get to the quarterfinals then. 2 teams then that had overachieved, I guess, Davey, Spurs and Shakhtar there. Utterly pumped and brought right back down to earth in the quarterfinals. No Redknapp masterclass against Mourinho and Real Madrid. 4-0 in Spain. Adebayor, I'm sure, enjoying his couple of goals, and a Ronaldo one in North London as well, just to seal it 5-0 over the piece. And Barcelona doing Barcelona things to Shakhtar. Maybe if that first leg had been in Ukraine, who knows, but it was not. It was in the new camp. 5-1 on the night, and Messi added another for fun when the return. So yeah, very comfortable indeed.
Refereed by dreadful Scottish referee Craig Thompson at Barca. 5-1 over Shakhtar. Yeah, look, I remember in the British press a lot of chat about, you know, Spurs going to Real Madrid, the Mourinho thing. At this point, by the way, the English press, he hadn't been back yet, the English press, but were missing Mourinho dreadfully. You know, like a first love had been torn away from them by the war. And any chance they had to interact with them, they were the moon. But, you know, Tottenham were... I praised them there for a performance for a lack of European experience. Well, this was stepping in. This was what, like when you go to the secondary school, wasn't it? And the big boys come up and sort of tell you who run the place. Real were brilliant, but Tottenham froze a bit, and they made life very easy for them. The second leg's just a pride thing at that point to try and to try and see if they can salvage something. They couldn't, and they end up getting a drop in. Barca were fine. I mean, I'll turn over to Adam because this is the whole reason he's done this show, is to get to this team. But Barca in that first leg, we praised Shakhtar. Shakhtar could defend, Adam. That's the thing. This was not a side, as you mentioned there, this was not a side who were all out attacking. They did have good attackers, but they could defend. They got taken apart.
Look at the goal scorers. Look at the 5 different goal scorers. Iniesta, Dani Alves, Gerard Piqué, Keita and Xavi. This is not a Messi masterclass and part of that front trident, Adam, that has absolutely ruined teams before, and David Villa showing his difference and all the rest of it. This has to reverberate around the continent that a team can do this. I love when you see 5 different goal scorers anyway, but when none of them are forwards,
yeah,
it's pretty special. Yeah, this is the best version, I think, and it's maybe difficult to talk about versions, but it does change a fair bit. Thanks to the middle season is a bit of a transition, if you like, between the first season and this one. But I think the different season is something that Ferguson spoke about as well. Going from, he said something which was quite interesting. I don't have the exact quote to hand, but for the final, he said, obviously we played them 2 years previously in the final, and it was Henry and Eto'o on the wings. He then said Pedro and Villa are a level above that in terms of what they can do to you, which I agree with that, but there'll be a lot of people out there that will think, no way, those 2 individuals are better than those 2 individuals. But it was never really about that. It was always about what does the team need, and those 2 were absolutely perfect for Messi in terms of support, direct running, giving them the angles, taking the weight off them, their movement, etc. So, yeah, for me, I think this is the best version, and it's also such a big difference to Spain, like we mentioned, and you're sort of starting to see it diverge away. Spain are now, as we said, obviously great 2008, 2010. They're now in full stuffy modes at this point, and it's basically, which I find really interesting, because it's basically 5 Barcelona attackers playing for Spain, and the only difference, if you think about the front 6, the only difference is Messi for Xavi Alonso. But if you look at that difference in terms of what those 2 types of players are, it really sums up the 2 differences between their teams, because Xavi Alonso is defensive midfielder. They've not got as much cutting edge. They don't have a Messi type player in there. So it's interesting to see that divergence there. But yeah, for me, this is the best, maybe not the best individuals or whatever. Obviously, the individuals are grown into it, but certainly the best version, I think, that they had. And yeah, it's summed up in this game, like you said, the fact that you've got all these players popping up to score that might not normally, is quite special, I think. And obviously, we spoke about Barcelona, Shakhtar, and how good they are. Barcelona could have done this to any team, I think, in this round or in this tournament, and it's maybe just a little bit unfortunate that it was them.
I'll stick with you, Adam, just briefly, because again, Schalke, they're through, drawing against Inter, very early start, Inter ahead after 1 minute. Joe Matip pulls one back, but Diego Milito doing what he does, and Inter are back in front. But then, Schalke got a goal back before half time. So 2-2 in the first half. That's pretty something. 5-2 to Schalke on the night. A 2-1 win at home, 7-3 on aggregate, and this really is again another level above what they've done so far. The surprise package now clearly of the competition into the semi-final in such a destructive way. This isn't sneaking it out, penalty kicks, away goals, or whatever. This is an evisceration here.
It is, and it's. I guess there's a few interesting things here for me about Schalke right now, as in spring 2011, when we're talking about them, is again how terrible they were in the league. That's something we've spoken about before. A team has a has a great season or a couple of great seasons, and then get into the Champions League. They were second the year before. They finished 14th this year. But what I guess was maybe more interesting for me from a kind of coaching point of view is Felix Magath was their manager for most of this season, but then got replaced by Ralf Rangnick, and I erased that from my mind. I didn't think that was I didn't think that was a thing, to be honest. But he was he came back in there for it must just have been, I don't know, a few months or so to tide them over. But that was something that was quite surprising, and I guess maybe ties into the number of goals that you're seeing, because he got them firing, if you like, until they weren't firing very much in the next round that we'll come to. So that was something that I hadn't really expected to see pop up. It's almost like we were talking about things that feel like they just happened yesterday. I didn't expect him to be about as early as he was, if you like, in that sense, because he's not really a name that I remember too much before his Leipzig stints, to be honest, even though he had been kicking about at various other clubs in Germany. So yeah, that was an interesting one to see. But I think just a bit of a crazy game. I think, and one of those ones that could easily, a couple of little decisions either way, and it could have potentially went differently, shall we say? Maybe that's trying to be a bit too cute about it. But yeah, Inter, a big surprise, I think, getting taken apart like that, despite not having a terrific season, really.
I would go further. I thought it was more than a bit of a... I was genuinely taken aback at this one. I was thinking Inter might pull off the never before done, because I thought they had a bit of, a bit of nous, a bit of spirit, the way they'd beaten Bayern in the last round, and I thought, oh, could this be the team that finally does the back-to-back, as good as Barça were at this point? And Real, by the way, at this point, were still, very much, I was thinking Mourinho, etc. But I thought Inter just had something about them. They might not win it, but I did not expect them to get destroyed at home like this.
Funny, we talk about the timing of goals a lot, and it can seem a little bit, I don't know, easy or prosaic or whatever, but Inter get the early goal, like literally the first minute, and then they get pegged back. Then Inter go in front 10 minutes.
They take the lead again, though. Yeah, exactly. I mean,
okay.
If you predicted this at half time, folks, and you had a bet on this, I hope that it paid for a mansion, because the idea that Inter were going to get done this badly by Schalke, and again, part of that is underrating Schalke, which I have to admit and plead guilty to. But I thought that this, to me, was one of those results that everyone in Europe, when looking at, watching the highlights, whatever, goes, wow. And again, another mistake, I was making plenty of them. I thought, does this signal Schalke's arrival as a genuine European? Is this the signal result? As it turned out, no. There's no point expanding. No, it didn't. But I just thought this was an incredible result to do it. And then, to beat them in the second leg as well, just to reinforce it, just to, we're better. Benedict, is it Howard it's pronounced? With a slight D sound in there. He was a decent player. I mean, he was in the World Cup winning squad of 2014, but he gets the win on the second leg. Yeah, I just thought this was a brilliant result. And again, though, weirdly, from what I've just said, I thought Inter could be potential winners this year. It didn't transfer onto Schalke. Isn't that strange? Logically, it sort of should. And if I'm thinking they can win it, then they lose heavily to someone. They should be able to win it, but I never got that impression from them. And again, that might be my own, bigger names, more established names, sort of prejudice towards them. But I still think this is genuinely one of the most sensational results this season, because I wouldn't have put if you'd offered me, if you'd gave me the money to go and put this on as a bet, I'd have donated it to charity rather than waste it, because it just was so unlikely.
David, the joy of doing this show over the years is you forget things and you're brought back into consciousness of them, and it's a joy. I have no memory whatsoever, or I had no memory until looking back at this, of Chelsea versus Manchester United in this Champions League quarter-final. I don't know if that says something about so many English teams been involved at this stage that they all, there's going to be a chance they're going to meet. Two are going to meet. We see them all the time anyway, and it just kind of blends into just this big soup of Premier League against Premier League. I just had nothing. Looking back, yes, I do remember that win at Stamford Bridge, the 1-0 Rooney tap in. That's probably a bit harsh. It's a good finish, but he's taken a great position. United win 2-1 at Old Trafford as well to make sure and go through. What I wanted to talk about that Rooney goal is Ryan Giggs flying down, and I mean still flying down that left flank to get to the touchline, to cut it back perfectly just for that to be swept in. I'd forgotten that this was very much his kind of valedictory year. I can't remember if it was 2011 was when he won the Sports Personality of the Year award or whatever. Basically, just because can we just kind of honour this very consistent long career with something? Maybe it was a kind of weird thing, but it was a bit of a final kind of curtain call, swan song, call it what you like. But he looked like the Ryan Giggs of 1994 there.
Yeah, and it was odd because he'd been playing mainly in midfield. We spoke about him on an earlier show. We all were there to watch him in the flesh at Ibrox play centre midfield against Rangers, and he was magnificent that night. You wouldn't have known this was a converted anything. He was absolutely superb. But this is like, all that was missing, Martin, was a ripped off shirt and a chest that was so hairy you wouldn't know he'd take the shirt off from this, because this was him at his flying best. Second leg, big decision that went wrong for Carlo, and I bow to no one in my love of Carlo Ancelotti, but he left out Drogba and put Torres in, and it didn't work. And to me, as an absolutely unalloyed, unabashed, and unashamed Drogba fanboy, wouldn't have made that decision, but particularly in the circumstances. And to me, it just seemed like to try to make something happen. He hadn't really settled in yet, Torres, he hadn't really. And I thought, well, okay, he did have that good record against United when he had a good record against most people when he was at Liverpool, but we hadn't really seen much from him. And this backfire. Eventually take him off, put Drogba on, he gets a goal, and you're thinking maybe comebacks on, but they concede from kick-off, and it's done.
And Drogba, of course, brought back for Old Trafford too little, too late, and Carlo would be out at the end of that season. That's just how things rolled at Stamford Bridge around this time.
He brings him on, right, in the second leg, in an admission that he'd got it wrong. But the best player on the park that night, Matt, was Javier Hernandez, who, he kind of just came into our lives and then left, didn't he, with us out with Old Trafford, maybe paying him an awful lot of attention. But he scored a shitload of goals for Man United. And he's another player who probably just didn't have that Solskjaer and Barcelona moment that elevated him, kind of up in your memory. But the thing I remember most specifically about this night, apart from while they're not playing Drogba, this Torres just looked gone. This was, I think, right at the height of his confidence loss, his form loss, everything, that he was dreadful. I mean, really bad. And I read one of the match reports as doing research into this, and he was described as a player running around in his own fog of self-doubt, which I thought was a brilliant description of him. He was just completely gone at this point, and Drogba comes on and scores. It's almost the end of bully. It's almost look what you could have won.
But he would have his moment. Just if you're a big Fernando Torres fan, wait about, and we'll try and squeeze Gary Neville's goalgasm into the broadcast when we get to that point. That'll do us for this week. Thank you, David.
Pleasure as always, guys. Thank you.
Cheers, Adam.
Thank you.
Big week for you next week. Just go easy until we get there. Until then, bye for now. If you enjoyed the show and want to help us grow, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. On YouTube, search for And It's Live Podcast. We've got new deep dives, drafts and breakdowns dropping every other day.